Character is one of the most important aspects to any show. And before you get me confused and think that I mean characters, like the people in a given show, I'm not. I'm talking about the personality of the overall product. Tenet was one of the greatest films I've ever seen, and the characters in that film matter so little that the protagonist's name is literally the protagonist. A lot of people might see that and think of it as a bad thing for the film. I view that as Christopher Nolan spending about 5 years to write the script and thinking to himself, man, I only have so long to tell the story with a really original, really complicated mechanic for action. Something's going to have to be taken out of the script in order for the film as a whole to not be like 10 hours long. The characters themselves weren't important. They were just a vehicle to tell the story. By removing the personality from the characters and leaving them with very simple, easily understood motivations, it allowed the personality of the film itself to shine. The film had character because the characters didn't. That's not to say that this should always be the case. I was just using Tenet as an example of how a story can remove personality from characters to benefit the overall experience. The biggest problem that can arise from this is when a show can't quite decide on whether to give more time to the most interesting aspect or flesh out the characters. Even a 12-episode anime will tend to have about an hour more content than a relatively long film like Tenet, so you can't just remove characters' importance completely, or the fact that they're underdeveloped becomes a far more noticeable issue. A perfect example of how easy this is to mess up is B.N.A. Just by looking at the character designs, you can immediately tell that this show has personality, and then you watch it and it's Zootopia. It's just a fairly standard murder mystery, except they're all furries for some reason. B.N.A. even has the same theme of racism bad, told in the same blunt method as a children's film. Except the fact that their animals isn't even incorporated into the show. And I know that plot-wise, yeah, it had some importance, but that's such a surface level detail. At least Zootopia uses the animals for visual gags and has sectors of the city devoted to the needs of a specific subset of animals. The film takes advantage of its animal characters as much as possible. In contrast, there isn't any real reason why B.N.A. couldn't have taken place in any other city. For a city that's full of people that can turn into animals, how come no part of the structure is devoted to the one aspect of its citizens that make them unique? The personality of the show is purely on the surface level, and the lack of thought put into maximising the aesthetic led to me already forgetting most of what happened in a show this vibrant and colourful only a year after it was released. Durarara handled this problem perfectly. What makes this show interesting is once again the city. This is essentially where all the personality comes from. The way it handles the issue of putting focus on the city and not the characters is by having a cast of just batshit insane people. When having a headless horseman is just casually accepted by the audience as just another kooky aspect of the show, then you know there's some weird stuff going on. And, far more importantly, there's some thought put into why all this weird stuff is happening. Little details like the headless horseman using a motorbike, because, yeah, why would you ride a horse in this day and age? Or how she has this fear of a cop on a motorbike who chases her for blatantly breaking the law. All of these little unnecessary details add to her character and makes her more believable. It feels like she's a person living in a city, not a character in a show. And yet, despite this being just one example from a whole cast of extremely outlandish personalities with completely varying power levels, the focus is on these relative normies. And you know what? It works. You come out of the show feeling like due to the large cast of distinct and memorable personalities, Ikebukuro itself becomes the main character, and the cast just serve the purpose of defining what it is about Ikebukuro that makes it Ikebukuro. I had a similar but much less satisfying feeling coming away from Kekkai Sensen. Anybody who saw my first impressions video a few months ago of some random crap that I was watching to see if they could make it into my super gay video of gay shit might remember that I gave it a load of praise, and that it was definitely worthwhile even if I cited some concerns. Around 7 episodes in, I bought the show. By episode 9, I only finished the series because of said financial investment in it. The reason being that the personality of the show again came from the personality of the city, and the intrigue created by combining a demon world with New York City. By episode 7, the show was still exploring New York. By episode 9, it went into this arc dealing with these vampires that had been slowly established until this point. To any fans of the show, I'm not saying the vampire arc is bad, but what it does for the show is take the spotlight away from the cool and interesting city and put the focus way more on the normie who I don't care about, And unlike Durarara, which revealed a twist about this normie in order to keep him as interesting as the parts of the city you actually cared about, here What's-His-Face remains What's-His-Face. His magical eyes that were introduced as a cool part of his character in episode 1 have long since lost their intrigue, and his personality remains as your typical shonen I want to help people guy. And there you go, that's the video. The thesis statement is that character is important sometimes, and it's not important sometimes. I think a lot of the time people put way too much importance on one aspect of anime and overlook how crucial other elements are. Plot is definitely one of these aspects given too much weight. I hear a lot of people say that plot is the most important part of any show, but when shit hits the fans, they'll be the first ones complaining. Just look at Attack on Titan as example. Fucking god tier anime, and the final season just aired earlier this year. Except it wasn't really the final season. And you know what? The final season is good, and the story is definitely the most appealing aspect of this particular show. But I really wish Studio Wit had been given the time required to make this season as good as the last ones, instead of switching studios like they did. MAPPA did a good job, but nobody can tell me that this looks better than this. It didn't kill the hype, but it definitely injured it. But you know what? Maybe you're not convinced. Odds are you enjoyed the final season of Attack on Titan, warts and all, and you still think plot is good enough to... I rest my case.